Welcome, everybody. Let's do a little thought experiment. Assume with me that you've got a team that isn't performing like you hoped. They have good goals, but they aren't meeting them. You feel like they have the right tools, but something is off. You have a hunch that some specific training might be the answer. So you talk to HR, you ask for help, and you roll out a training. A few weeks later, your people complete the course, you check the box, but the behavior and the results are still the same. Even though it isn't really, this still feels like a failure. And I don't know anyone who likes failure, but the scenario I've described is pretty common. So in this episode, I'd like to offer a few hopefully encouraging ideas. What if the start of the problem isn't the training? What if the way we identify leadership needs, the way we think about performance gaps, is where things get off track? And what if there's a better way to approach the process? That's what I want to talk about today. Why leadership needs analysis isn't just an L&D function. It's an act of leadership. Let's get into it. Whether you are a VP, a new manager, or the head of people and culture, you're doing needs analysis all the time. Every time you ask, why isn't this working? Or what do we need to do to hit our goals? You're diagnosing existing or potential performance gaps. Oddly enough, the most common approach to diagnosis is to go straight from hypothesis to proposed solutions. There's a parallel here to something I noticed when I was working as a software engineer. I saw two different patterns in the way engineers tackled complicated problems. Everyone always started with a hypothesis about what the problem was. Less experienced engineers would start proposing scattershot fixes for the problem. So let's try changing the data structure. How about we rewrite the logic? More experienced engineers would start with some experiments to eliminate possibilities and narrow the focus. In the end, this approach almost always saved time. Similarly, our needs analysis often jumps straight from a hypothesis to proposed solutions. We just need people to be more motivated. We just need to train people how to do this certain thing. Or the team just needs better tools. We start offering answers before we've really understood the problem. So here are a few common conditions that indicate you might have a discovery process that's grasping for solutions before the real problem is clear. There's one I call the wish list trap. We ask what people want to learn, not what they need to perform. So in this case, we're kind of hoping that everyone already knows what they need. They often don't. Another one I call the top-down bias. We listen to executives and forget frontline perspectives. Trouble is, executives themselves are often missing important input from the people in the trenches. Another one is called survey fatigue. We gather data, but it's vague, stale, or surface level. Maybe to save time, the survey offered better communication as one of a few options, but the 5 respondents actually had 6 different things in mind when they picked that option. Another one is what I call cultural mismatch. Even great training fails when it fights the culture it lives in. If you have a culture that punishes failure, for example, you aren't going to see a lot of the risk-taking required for innovation even if you tell people that's what they need to be doing. Any of those sound familiar? Here's the argument I'd like to offer. Great leadership development starts with great diagnosis. And great diagnosis starts with leaders who understand how good things can sometimes pull us in opposite directions. So needs analysis is an act of leadership, not just an L&D issue. At its best, it's a thoughtful, deliberate practice that requires both curiosity and courage. So, what does effective needs analysis actually look like in practice? Based on the research, here are several core recommendations. Start with strategic goals. Anchor the process in what your organization is trying to achieve. What business outcomes matter most? Another recommendation, widen the lens. Get input from multiple layers of the organization, especially frontline voices. They often see problems and possibilities leadership misses. Another recommendation, use real data. Go beyond surveys. Incorporate performance metrics, observational feedback, and behavioral evidence. Have conversations with individuals. Another recommendation, look for barriers, not just symptoms. So a drop in productivity might not be a skill issue. It could be a workflow friction, unclear priorities, or even team dynamics. And another one, design for the culture you have. Good training fits the emotional and operational context it's entering. Otherwise, it gets rejected or ignored. Those recommendations aren't especially radical, but implementing them well is harder than it sounds. Why? Because each one introduces tension. Gathering better data takes time, but leaders often feel pressure to act quickly. Listening broadly opens up insight, but it can also create conflict. Focusing on root causes may reveal issues that feel political or uncomfortable. And this is where many efforts stall, not because the ideas are wrong, but because the path forward is filled with competing values. And that's exactly why I believe needs analysis is more than a technical process. It's a leadership act, one that requires a particular kind of mindset. That mindset is what I call paradox-aware leadership. Let me explain. Behind every real performance challenge is a set of tensions that don't resolve cleanly. Some examples. To understand your people, you need to listen deeply. But to get anything done, you also need to lead decisively. Efficiency requires that you standardize processes, but you also know that good training is personalized to individual people. You need to get short-term wins and also build for long-term growth. Some voices are going to want you to protect systems. Others want you to prioritize people. The common assumption when you encounter a tension like any of those is that you have to choose one or the other. What I've learned, though, is that the best leaders don't pick one or the other. They learn to honor both. Instead of either or, they think both and. Those best leaders believe and act as though the best solutions won't come by resolving these tensions, but by embracing them, leaning into them, and holding the tension between two opposing values and using it as an energy source to find creative, innovative and out-of-the-box new things to try. That's what I mean by paradox-aware leadership. And when you bring that mindset to your team's growth or your organization's leadership development, everything changes. If you can identify the specific tensions that you're dealing with, you can actually tap into that tension as a source of energy. So how do you do that? The model we use and teach at LPC is simple, repeatable, and built to honor complexity. It's called the Leadership Progress Cycle. And it goes like this. Start by setting goals. What are you really trying to accomplish? What result matters? When you know that, the next step is to identify barriers. What's actually getting in the way? And as a hint, it's often a competing priority, value, or need. The next step is to experiment. Try an experiment that honors both competing values. This is the step that's most often missed. It is an act of faith just to look for that kind of a solution. It's tempting to think it doesn't exist, but I promise those solutions do exist. They make you get creative. They take you out of the box. They're usually very specific to the people, the time, and the place you're in. Make that experiment as small, affordable, and fast as you possibly can. So pilot a new habit, run a micro-training. And finally, evaluate results. What happened? What shifted? What still needs to change? And as soon as you see an experiment producing the results you want, you know you're on the right track. That's when you can scale your training. This cycle works whether you're leading an enterprise-wide initiative or supporting a new team lead on your staff. It puts curiosity ahead of assumptions. It invites reflection before rollout. It rewards action and learning. So here's the question. What's your current approach to diagnosing leadership needs? Are you rushing to solutions? Are you listening to the right voices? Are you asking the kind of questions that hold paradox instead of erasing it? Are you modeling the kind of leadership your team will need to thrive in the future? Needs analysis isn't a checkbox. It's an act of leadership that guides people to real results. And that means you don't pretend you've got a fast fix. Instead, you experiment. You measure results. You find the new solutions custom built for the challenges your team is facing. That's the work. Thanks for listening to the Leadership Progress Cycle podcast. If this episode sparked something for you, visit thelpc.com and explore more about paradox-aware leadership. Until next time, be curious, be courageous, and lead on.